Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm a supervisor here in Berry County. I have the privilege of a couple of locals here from Berry County doing a training and giving us all kinds of good information on mandated reporting. Bill Mattson from the Family Support Center and Rebecca Werner from DHS here in Berry.
Okay, thank you. The training today is on mandated reporters, and we have given you a toolkit, a manual for identifying and reporting child abuse and neglect. My name is Bill. I'm the program director at Family Support Center in Berry County. Rebecca, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Rebecca Werner. I'm a CPS supervisor here in Berry County, and I've been helping out the Family Support Center with these trainings for about 9 years-ish. So if you have any questions about CPS, I'm here to answer those as well.
And as we get started with the training, if you could leave your audio feed on mute, and if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and ask. But if generally, if you could leave it on mute, that will help with background noise. I did give Shelley books and packets that contain the reporter manual, a fact sheet on shaken baby syndrome, intro to online reporting, a survey that I would like everybody to fill out and then get back to your supervisors so they can get it back to me. And I believe there was a handout on identifying sexual abuse.
Bill, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I record this for those who couldn't attend today?
Absolutely.
I'm going to go ahead and start it, and it does say something, so let me just do that real quick
Okay.
so I don't interrupt you again.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right. In your manual, on page 5, the training actually starts, and the manual that you were given was the 2020 version, and we're in the process of updating for 2021, and the statistics have changed a little. We use the Child Welfare Information Gateway. Their newest report is February of 19, and then we use the Kids Count in Michigan data book for statistics, and that is the 2021 version. So as we can see here, that in Berry County in 2020, there were 1,526 children that were parts of or identified in investigations by protective services. And that means total children living in the home. They may have not been the object of the complaint, but they're children that live in the home. And of those children in 2020, 134 of those children were found to be victims of abuse or neglect. And also in 2020, here in Berry County, 28 children were placed in out-of-home care due to abuse and neglect. The state of Michigan reports that there were 205,631 children included in investigations, and almost 28,000 of those were confirmed victims of abuse or neglect. One sad thing is that there were 63 child deaths resulting from abuse or neglect in Michigan. As the new manuals come out, these newer statistics will be placed in there. Abuse and neglect impacts a lot of people, not just in the counties you work in, but statewide and countrywide. It's a big impact. And a good thing about what you do and what we do is that we have the ability to protect children and report any problems that we see concerning abuse and neglect. Let's see here. Next slide. On page 6 of the book, it talks about the laws that really set up the child abuse prevention in the country and in Michigan. The federal government came up with a law called the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. And basically it said that each state needed to define what abuse and neglect was. Michigan in 1975 put into place a Public Act 238 that defined abuse and neglect, but it also defined what a mandated reporter was and what their responsibilities were. And a mandated reporter means somebody that needs to report immediately any instances or suspicions of abuse and neglect. They need to do that with an oral report to a state telephone number, and then within 72 hours they were required to submit a written report. In addition to that, of course, you have to notify the agency that you work for. There were whistleblower protections, so you could not be fired or sanctioned because you reported abuse or neglect. And they had a penalty for failure to report that included up to 93 days in jail and a fine of $500. Whoops. On page 7, there's a list of types of people that are included in the law as mandated reporters. And you can see on this list there's DHHS employees, physicians, nurses, audiologists, psychologists, social service technicians, a lot of different types of people that are considered by law a mandated reporter. Not knowing exactly what all you do, what you're licensed as, what you're employed as, I can't say exactly if you fit into a legal definition of mandated reporter, but the job that you do with CASA means that you need to report any instances or suspicions of abuse and neglect. As a mandated reporter, it's important to remember that you have to give an immediate report, immediate verbal report to the state via their intake hotline. And the phone number is there on the screen. It's also in the manual, and it's easy to find online. Now, if you have, if you're new to working with kids and reporting, you can ask your supervisor for assistance in trying to determine if something should be reported. However, if you feel that it needs to be reported and your supervisor might say, well, I don't know, it's too close to call, or maybe we should think about it, as a mandated reporter, you have to report. So, you know, you can ask for assistance in thinking about is it something that should be reported. For example, if a kid discloses that they only get TV dinners every night and they want something else, or they have to eat green beans and they don't get carrots, you know, there's some things that probably don't fit into reporting. And as Rebecca gives her part of the training, she'll indicate what is reportable and what isn't. You can ask for help from your supervisors, but ultimately it's your responsibility to make that phone call. And then within 72 hours, three days, you have to get a paper report to them. Typically, people either email or fax it to DHHS, Central Intake. You can do either. One of the handouts that you have in your packet is about online reporting. If you register yourself as an online reporter, go through the process, follow the steps, you don't have to make the call, you don't have to fax in a report. What you'll be doing is you'll be doing two steps at once. The online report replaces the immediate verbal report in the paper report. So in some cases, it's better to do it that way. You can knock out, kill a couple birds with one stone there by doing it that way. On page 9 of the book is the actual form that you would fill out. And at the top of the form, it asks if you called DHS about the complaint. So this is the 3200 form that you would fill out after the phone complaint. So just a couple comments. It's probably best, even before you fill out or make the phone call, you have to get your thoughts down, right? You have to know all the information that they're going to ask you on the phone. So really, the procedure-wise, you really should look at using this form or the categories on this form to get your information together before you either online report or before you call and give a verbal report. So at the top, it asks if you phoned in the complaint. It asks what the log number is. The log number is a number that they will give you either via at the end of the phone call or via email when you do the online reporting. And for communication coming back to CASA or yourselves about the case in the future, it won't have the family name on it. It will just have the log number. So you need to write that down and keep that handy for the records so you know what's happening, or if you have to dig into it and see if you can get information on what happened, you have to have that log number. As you can see from the 3200 form, a lot of the information is demographic type identifying information, names of the children, birth dates, social security number, sex, race. Try to get as much information as you can. You don't have to fill everything in, and Rebecca will talk about what the person on the other end of the line will say when you're giving the information. But try to fill the form out as much as possible. The mother's name, father's name, the children's address, where they live, city, county, phone number, name of the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator, and then the relationship of that person to the children. Line 13 of the form wants you to describe the injury or conditions. So be as descriptive as possible. You want CPS to have as much information as you possibly can give them. It's a small area there. You could attach another page, but as much information, not what you think or feel, but actually observable information that will help them look into the case and decide where it needs to go. At the bottom of the form is an area for up to six employees to sign off on the report. Just a caveat about that. If four of us are in the room together and a child discloses to all four of us at the same time an incident, we could all sign off on the same report. If that same child discloses the same incident to four different workers, but they do it separately where you're all individually notified of the incident, you all would have to do a report of your own. And you can see that there on the screen. And the back of the form on page 10 is really to be completed by medical personnel if they have to do a physical examination. So you really don't do anything with that. You do the first page. Second page, if it's necessary, somebody else will fill out, and then you get it over to DHHS either via fax or you're using this information as a kind of a cheat sheet to fill out the online form. Any questions about the form? Rebecca, I'll
Can
turn
you,
oh,
talk, I'm sorry.
that's all right. Go
Can you
ahead.
talk about the, online?
I will let Rebecca talk about that if you want to comment about the online reporting, Rebecca.
Do you have a question specific about it, Glenn?
I just wondered if there was a page in the booklet about it. Their information.
There's not a page in the book. There should be an extra handout.
Okay, the other handout has it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll find it then.
On page 11, it talks about other considerations. Being a mandated reporter, your identity, well, any person that calls to report an instance of abuse and neglect is protected by law. And that goes for mandated reporters too. Just because you're mandated doesn't mean that the family will know that the report's coming from you. However, being a mandated reporter, sometimes children only have seen so many people in one day, and a family can assume who made the report. So just to keep in mind, as a mandated reporter, you can choose whether to let the family know that you're having to make a report. Some mandated reporters build reports and rapport with you and build relationships, and they feel like honest about that report helps maintain that relationship. It's an individual choice, but something to think about. If you do choose to do that, you explain to the family that you are doing your job and that you're required by law. You can reassure them that it doesn't mean you think they're a bad parent, that you just want to make sure that their children are safe. By making a report, it doesn't necessarily mean that, the children will be taken away or anything like that. Part of a CPS investigation is we connect families to services they need. So just because a report's being made doesn't mean anything catastrophic could happen, but we could also just assist the family with some of their needs, even if it doesn't rise to abuse or neglect. Some helpful hints when making a report. As Bill kind of already mentioned, you want to be prepared. You can be prepared for making the report by filling out this 3200 form ahead of time, because they will go through and ask you all those specific questions. And it can be nerve-wracking to do that if you don't have to do it very often, and so having it right in front of you will help you walk through that process. Centralized intake will also ask you lots of questions that are not on this form. Do they have any pets at their home? Do they have any guns? Do they have any weapons? It's okay if you don't know those answers. They have to ask those questions to try to assess the safety for our workers that go out to the home and to try to gather as much information as possible. But if you don't have the answers to that, it's okay. You can just tell them that you don't know. Don't feel like you should have asked more questions or gotten more details from anybody. They just have to ask those questions. At the end of, after you make your referral, you will get a letter. You will get a letter stating if the allegations did not meet abuse or neglect definitions by the state. You will get a letter if it's already, what you're reporting is already being investigated. And you will get a letter if it was assigned for investigation. However, that letter will not come to the end of the investigation. So that letter you would receive 30 days after the investigation occurred. But either way, as a mandated reporter, you get a letter letting you know the outcome of your call to CPS. If you're unhappy with the actions taken by the CPS investigator, on page 11, under check and balance, there is a hotline number that you can call and express those concerns, and they will look into the case to make sure it was handled according to our state policy. Something to keep in mind is that you're not an investigator, you're simply a reporter, so you don't have to ask much questions, you don't have to dig in and make sure it's absolutely true before you call in to centralized intake. You just have to have reasonable suspicion. Being a mandated reporter means that you are required by law to call into CPS whenever you have a reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect, or when a child or family member in the home discloses abuse or neglect. So if grandma lives in the house with the family and she tells you some concerns that she's witnessing, you would be required to report that. However, if grandma lives in her own home and is hearing through her daughter that her son is doing this with his children, you are not required to report that. That's when you use the reason of suspicion. So, if you have reason to believe it's true, then you can certainly report it. It's not saying you can't report, but you're just not required unless it's coming from someone directly in the home or if you witness something that you believe to be abuse or neglect yourself. And another thing to consider is that if you're a mandated reporter, you're always a mandated reporter. Whether you're on or off the job, it makes you a mandated reporter. So, like for me, example, I'm a mandated reporter, and I'm not just a mandated reporter when I'm in working status. If I go to the grocery store and I witness something, I am still a mandated reporter, and I have to report. If you ever come across a situation that is an immediate child safety issue, for example, a big one is if a parent comes to pick up their child and they're intoxicated, that's an immediate call to 911 and then CPS. 911 law enforcement will be able to insert themselves and assess for safety at a quicker speed than CPS. If there's active domestic violence, that's also a 911 call first, then CPS. Even with domestic violence, we try to get involved in those cases because even if the child is not being harmed in the act, they are witnessing, and that is very traumatic for the child, and so we like to get involved and get the child any help that they may need to help them process what they're seeing. And then lastly, we like to cover human trafficking. Being CASA workers, you are likely to come across some teens who are in care and could have been trafficked. So some things to look out for in those situations are if the teen has any sexually transmitted diseases, if they're suffering any side effects of post-traumatic stress, if they are malnourished or hungry, if they show signs of physical or sexual abuse, if they discuss any physical restraint, confinement, or torture, if they seem very guarded about their situation and concealing who they've been with or what they've been doing. We've had a few cases in Berry County, and they are often living with unrelated adults. And these unrelated adults, they typically do not know their actual real names. They usually have nicknames or names for these people they live with. They don't know what their real names are. And then another thing we've seen locally here in Berry County is that the teen will have multiple cell phones. So, as they come into care, we might ask to have their cell phone, and they bring out 7 to 9 cell phones. That's usually a sign of concern for human trafficking. Any questions about any of that? Okay, so on pages 12, 13, 14, 15, are different signs of abuse or neglect. So these 4 pages go over physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, medical neglect, and other types of neglect like physical neglect and supervision. So I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail. It's right there, and you guys can read it and review it. But I am going to highlight a few things. So on page 12, we discussed physical abuse. And one thing I think it's important to point out is that physical abuse, as defined by the state of Michigan, has to be physical discipline or a physical act that results in an injury to a child. So bruises, welts, lacerations, broken bones, that is physical abuse. A parent is able to physically discipline their child as long as it does not leave marks or bruises. So that's a big misnomer, I think, sometimes that people hear, like CPS doesn't let parents use physical discipline. That's not true. It has to result in an injury. So an allegation of a parent spanking their child but no marks, that's not abuse or neglect. They are allowed to do that. Another thing I'd like to point out is medical neglect. Medical neglect is defined as the absence of medical care that results in a permanent disfigurement, death, or bodily harm to the child. So a parent does not have to put their child on an ADHD medication. That is not a requirement. That is not something that's abuse or neglect. However, if the child has asthma and the parent is not getting their medications refilled and the child is being having to be taken to the emergency room because they're unable to breathe and the parent continues to not follow through with getting those medications or follow-up appointments, that is considered medical neglect because that child could die from that. So just a couple explanations of that. On the bottom of page 13 goes over the Michigan Safe Delivery Act. So a parent can anonymously surrender their infant up to 72 hours at a police, fire, or hospital, and there are no consequences to them. So that child would immediately be placed into foster care from a private agency for adoption. However, the caveat to that is if the child is looked over by medical professionals and found to have any signs of abuse or neglect, then that would be investigated by CPS. A couple other things that CPS did not investigate are truancy and runaways, head lice on its own. So if a child has chronic head lice, that is not something we investigate. However, if that chronic head lice is accompanied by other physical neglect symptoms or signs like feces under the nails or feces on their body, dirty clothing, that is something that we would investigate. We also do not investigate refusing immunizations and sibling-on-sibling violence. The caveat to the sibling-on-sibling violence is if it's, well, my brother hits me and my mom doesn't do anything about it. That's not something we would investigate. However, if a sibling has a criminal charge for being abusive in some nature, whether it's physically or sexually, to another sibling, and there's a safety plan in place through that child's criminal court or probation, and the parent is not following that, that is something that we would assign for investigation for the parent failing to protect their victim child from the perpetrator child. So it says what does CPS not investigate, but there's always a little slight change could make it be something that we do investigate. Any questions about any of that? We do talk a little bit about shaken baby syndrome because it's often thought of to be children under 3 years old. However, there's more evidence to show that even preschool or young elementary age children can be affected by shaken baby syndrome if they're just real little and petite. Their brains can still move around in their head if they're being shaken or thrown around. And so it's something that we keep an open mind to, and not just infants, but a little older preschool age children and young elementary age children as well.
All right. Thanks, Rebecca. Just a comment on the shaken baby syndrome slide and the information in your book. The new statistics say that 80% of perpetrators are natural parents, and that about 45% of all deaths from abuse are children under the age of 1. So the death amount is about the same, but 80% of perpetrators in abuse situations are one or both parents. So that's kind of different to look at. Page 16 is really looking at how do we respond when a child discloses to us. And a few big do's that we need to look at is you have to underreact. You can't freak out and run out of the room when they tell you a story that you don't want to hear. You have to stay calm, stay with them, and listen to them intently. Don't do underreact. Do believe the child. The child probably has a lot of people in their life that they don't want to believe, that they don't believe believes them, and they're disclosing to you, so they have some kind of trust in you. So believe in them. Reassure the child and help relieve any guilt that the child may have. A lot of children will have been told that either they got hurt or they They had something happen to them because they were bad. They did something wrong, so that's why I hurt you. So relieve that guilt if you can. Never say to a child, why didn't you tell me sooner? They've made that decision to disclose it to you now. Just accept that and move on and try to get them help. We all know that working in this field, working with children, working with disclosures is sometimes a tough business. So you have to take care of yourself. Work within your agency's protocols. So you need to know what CASA says about reporting and reporting child abuse. You need to know that as well as you need to know the state laws. You need to be prepared. You all work separately, I would assume. Have copies of the 3200 form with you in your notebook or your briefcase or however you have your work material. Always have a copy of that. Have that phone number for the central intake, or if you're going to do online reporting, have that as a bookmark on your laptop or your tablet or whatever you use for work. Remember, disclosure is a good thing. We want children to say when they're being hurt, and we want to protect them from abuse and neglect. So it's always a good thing. Share your concerns that you might have and your feelings with your supervisors and other co-workers. It's good to talk about things to get some of that stress off. Use any stress management tools you may have, your agency may have for you. Try to find something that reduces any stress that might be building up. Be clear about your role. Remember, you're a reporter, not an investigator. Get the information you need, but you don't need to case out places or follow people. Get the information you can get and send it to DHHS. Acknowledge your feelings. Feelings are normal. You feel bad, sad, however you feel, acknowledge it. Your feelings are real. And stay focused on the child and their feelings. Rebecca?
All right, on the top of page 17, it just reviews the reporting protocol and legal considerations. We give you the phone number again, and listed right here on the slides is the web page for the online reporting if you want to jot that down real quick. Just a reminder, if you do call in, you have to complete the 3200 within 72 hours and follow your internal agency protocol. That being said, reporting to the head of your organization does not satisfy the reporting requirements of the law. That's very important to acknowledge. And then what happens after you file a report? So after you file the report, it will get dispersed to the local county where the child resides for investigation. During the course of the investigation, CPS talks to the caregivers, the parents, the children, of course, any children that reside in the home and any other adults living in the home as well. And then depending on what the allegations are about, they will talk to anyone else in the community that might have knowledge to those allegations. During that time, and all those conversations, they'll decide if there is evidence of abuse or neglect or not defined by the state of Michigan. If there is, you can turn to page 17 or 18, and it goes over the different outcomes of a CPS investigation. So if there is a preponderance of evidence, which means 51% or more of the evidence says abuse or neglect occurred, it would score out as a category 1, 2, or 3 case. Category 2 and 3 are when abuse or neglect has occurred, and those depend on, category 2 or 3 depends on the risk level in the home. So we have a risk assessment we complete on each family that if we have an investigation on, and if it's a low or moderate risk, it is a category 3 case, and those are open for about 60 days and monitored and referred to services. Category 2 case is a higher intensive risk case, and those are monitored for ideally 180 days, but it can go much longer than that if the family's needs are great. And we also provide services during that time to help rectify the situation that brought us to the home in the first place. If there's no amount of services that can protect the children, then it will be a Category 1 case, and we will petition the court for either removal of the children or removal of the perpetrator, or just to order the parents to participate in services. Participation with CPS in general is voluntary. So if we recognize that there's quite a need in the home, but the parents refuse to participate in any services, and that lack of participation puts the children at further risk, then we can petition the court and ask them to mandate the parents to participate in a treatment plan without removing the kids. So that Category 1 it's just any court involvement that we may seek for the family. As a CASA, those are often the cases that you guys are involved in. They would be Category 1 cases. If there is no evidence or insufficient evidence of abuse or neglect, those are Category 4s and 5s. We very rarely have a Category 5 case because those are no evidence of abuse or neglect. And typically, any case we get, there might be some part of the allegations that are truthful. It just doesn't rise to abuse or neglect. So they are often Category 4 cases. And even those cases, we can still refer the families to services if their need in their home is great. It just doesn't rise to the level of abuse or neglect. And then on page 19, it goes over the different civil child protective hearings, and these would be any of the court hearings that you all would be involved in. So it lists each different type of hearing out right there and what occurs at those hearings. That would be very useful for you to refer back to if you're newer to the role. Page 20 and 21 goes over the different criminal child protective proceedings. So those are child abuse, like criminal child abuse charges. And then page 21 goes over criminal sexual abuse of a child charges. I'm not going to go over each one of those because I am certainly not well versed in the criminal system part of it, but they're there for you to reference if you ever wonder what's the difference between child abuse first degree or second degree. You can look it up right here, and it's readily available to you. Any questions about any of that? Great, thank you.
All right. So as a mandated reporter and doing the job that you do, you're the front line with the kids and the families, and it's important that you understand that you're important to those families. You can be a support and an encouragement and maybe lend some practical education to both the children and the families. Here in Berry County, the Family Support Center of Berry County does a lot of free service for our parents in the county. And just use this a minute here to give a quick plug for some of our programs. We provide cribs to families that need safe sleeping for their infants and toddlers. We provide those free of charge to families that need those. We provide diapers to the community. We have lots of educational efforts around prevention of abuse and neglect, prevention of sexual abuse, family parenting. We have a YouTube channel that if you go to our website, familysupportberry.com, we have close to 30 videos on all different types of topics on our YouTube channel. In addition to that, we also work with kinship families in Berry County. That's relatives of the children taking care of the children. It may be grandparents, aunts, or uncles, or cousins that are taking care of their relatives' children. Are there any final questions for Rebecca or I?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Thank you so much, Bill and Rebecca. This has been really insightful and interesting. Since most of our advocates, all of our advocates are volunteers, and just to give a little reminder of our internal policy, supervisors are typically the ones that actually make the report, but you do need to notify us of those, and we work with you to kind of go through this process because it is challenging and it's a lot of information to gather. But for our advocates, most of them are working directly with families that are already in the system. So oftentimes our first call is to the caseworker to notify them of any concerns we have, and if it rises to that level of abuse and neglect, then we're filing a report. And one thing that's been coming up a lot lately is the legalization of marijuana. And so do you have any recommendations on what the reporting standard for that should be? I did notice you had alcohol and drugs listed under neglect, but what rises to that level would you say?
So that's a really good question. I mean, I'll be honest with you, we kind of struggle with that here as well because of the recent change. So any substance abuse in general has to directly impact the child. So simply using isn't abuse or neglect. Their use has to lead to some sort of neglect of their parental duties or abuse of some sort. So for marijuana, it's kind of hard. It depends, right? Like if they have edibles and they're within reach of the children, that's something that needs to be addressed. If the kids go to bed and they use at night after the kids go to bed and nothing has occurred, that's not going to get assigned for an investigation. It's something we talk to parents about because just like alcohol, a parent can drink, but they have to make sure they have a sober caretaker, and the same goes with marijuana. So it really depends on the situation, but overall, the use has to somehow affect their parenting.
That's a great explanation, Rebecca. Thank you. And then I think that kind of goes to what you were talking about as well with calling 911 if someone's asking to our children. I think that distinction is really helpful because use in and of itself may not correlate to neglect, but if there is specific neglect happening as a result of that's very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then I did have another question, and you may not have a lot of information on this, but we also see a lot of MIC investigations because we also work with a lot of foster placements. Do you have any insight into that process or anything that you can give us information about that?
Well, the MIC process of investigating is the same as a standard CPS investigation. The only difference is the reporting to, so like if a private agency, if it's a licensed foster parent and a private agency or even DHHS licensed that home, there's a tandem process that the foster parent gets protection from their licensing agency as well. So there might be a licensing investigation and a CPS investigation, and the foster parent can hold off on that interview until they have representation from the agency that licensed them. So but the actual step-by-step, the definitions, the tasks associated to it are all the same. So even the time frames are the same. It's just a matter of there's other people that are going to be involved with it at the same time and doing it. So licensing is going to investigate if it's a licensing protocol or policy that's not managed. So I'm going to use physical discipline as an example. A licensed foster parent is not allowed to physically discipline a child. So you might have dual investigation. Licensing might be investigating the violation of that policy, and then CPS would be investigating if there was abuse or neglect. So you might have licensing that says, yes, that they are in violation. The CPS would be in denial because they didn't neglect. So there are two different sets of rules and policies there that have to be investigated, and they are done so by each individual entity. Was that helpful?
Oh, yes. Wonderful. Thank you. Other questions from any of our advocates?
Rachel, I'd like to make a comment, just to encourage the advocates, of course, to like talk to your supervisor if you have any questions. But it's common, even in the field, when I was at DHS, to consult with our supervisors as to whether this should be called in or not. Does it rise to a level of assignment? Does it rise to a level of imminent risk? And I just want to encourage everyone to always err on the side of safety. Centralized intake are very well versed. They consult with their supervisors. They follow the law. They follow the protocol. And if they don't assign it, let them weed that out. Don't make that determination on your own. They are in that professional field and trained in that area to assign or not assign. So I would just say err on the side of safety every time.
Wonderful. Well, I think it was a very thorough presentation, and this handbook is incredibly helpful, so thank you for that. Oh, Fern, you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
No, I just was going to say thank you. It was very informative.
You're welcome.
Yes, you're welcome. Happy to do it.
Well, if that's all the questions I have, I think we are free to go. Sorry for the technical difficulties today. I'm not sure what's going on with my computer, but thanks for bearing with us and for all the great information. This will be incredibly helpful for our team.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day, everyone.